Ms. Gruhl, Mr. Smith, myself, Bernard Parks as chair. Colleagues would like to do if we can go numbers 12 through 16 on consent.
All right, and then Mr. Parks, on item 14, there was a CAO-CLA report issued March 9th, and we would request that the committee approve the CAO and CLA recommendations of that report.
Do we have that to pass out to the committee?
Pass it down.
Oh, 12 through, I'm sorry. Does that cover number 14? Okay, do we get a motion on 12 through 16? Okay. We'll move 12 through 16 on consent, and also as requested by the CAO that we'd ask that the recommendations on page 2 of the CLA's recommendations on page 2 of the report dated March 9th be added to our report and also approved by this committee. Would like to do, because we have a scheduling issue, if we can do number 7, 9, and 10, the three presentations right off the bat. Then we'll go to closed sessions because we have attorneys on the clock, and we'll do numbers 1 through 6, and then we'll come back for the remaining items. So we can start off with
Item number 7, discussion relative to the CAO and CLA to provide an update on the status of the state budget and impacts on the city budget.
We're on 7.
Good afternoon. Maria Gutierrez with the City Administrative Officer. Since we last reported on the status of the state budget, which was when the mid-year was before your committee today, we have seen no substantial changes with a few exceptions. One of those issues I understand is before your committee today, the discussion on the gas tax, so we will defer discussion on that issue for that item. Second issue was the suspension of the state bond funds to localities. That issue is also before your committee today. I believe it's one of those items on...
Yeah, item number 8 and 11.
So we will defer discussion on that also.
The only thing... sorry.
I'm sorry. We have received information today, actually, regarding the additional impacts to the Supplemental Law Enforcement Services Fund. In the mid-year report, we reported a current year impact of $2.65 million for this funding source to the police department. It is a funding source to sworn salaries. As a result, we recommended a reduction to the police department's sworn salaries account. Today, we have been notified of an additional $1 million impact, which would result in a total impact to the city this year of approximately $3.65 million.
Go over that again. We've been notified of an additional $1 million shortfall.
This is an additional $1 million reduction to the Supplemental Law Enforcement Services Fund. We are currently looking at how this will impact the department, but we did receive that information today, so additional details are forthcoming regarding what the total impact will be.
Okay, and what's the correct title of that fund?
Pardon me?
The correct title of that fund you're referring to?
It's called the Supplemental Law Enforcement Services Fund.
Okay. All right. Now, the other issue is, and it kind of dovetails into our issue dealing with the some of our projects. We've not heard any more from the state as it relates to when they might release our funds, if they are in a better situation to actually sell their bonds. So none of that has been, any other clarity to that?
We've heard a rumor, and I haven't had a chance to substantiate it, but it was in connection with some of the parks grants, and there was a rumor that they wouldn't be able to reissue or issue bonds for those projects for maybe another year.
That's what the Prop K,
Prop 12,
Well-
Prop 40.
I'm Lori Hancock with the CAO. I did speak with the state today, the representative from OGALS, and they indicated that they were hoping to see some release during the summer. And this was not official, but that's where they're going at this point. So it looks like they may start reimbursements in midsummer.
okay. Now, that would be after the May election and their bond or their issue that's going before the public to retire some of, or to relieve some of the debt in the state?
I'm sorry, I don't
So
understand.
they're making that decision after the May election, which they have an issue on that election about,
They did not indicate when they would be making the determination, but the Pooled Money Board, Investment Board, would be meeting again March 18th, and we may have more information after that.
any other additional information from the federal government?
From the state or from the federal government? I
Federal,
don't have
yeah.
any information from the state.
That's the CLA, the CAO.
No, not that I'm aware of.
You know, Mr. Parks, I
Mhm.
don't know, I may have missed this in the last week, but do we have, I know it included in the financial status report some updates, but I haven't seen any document that says, a summary document that says, here's where the city is going to be impacted. This one which you highlight today, again, what we know, but I know the mayor's office had some of that information initially, but I haven't seen a summary document that says, here's how much we potentially will lose and timeline, and I think that would be helpful to us, because otherwise it's at least from my perspective, a catch-as-catch-can, whether or not, and it doesn't even have to come to this committee, but to the city council. Here's the latest, almost probably on a weekly basis, because of the information that's being put out there and/or actions that are being taken by the state. So I don't know if it included completely in the FSR all of the things we think that are going to be part of it, but I've never seen a summary document, and that maybe I don't know if anyone else has seen a summary document.
I think it's been commented on the FSR, but I don't know if it's, but it changes hourly, and a lot of it's rumor or bits and pieces of information, but the reason that we put this on weekly is to get as up to date as we can, but it would be helpful if we could eventually start plugging in the pieces and give us a summary and then update it as we go forward, because that's something we also need to move forward to the council.
Before your next meeting, we'll work with the CAO to put together a chart and update it every time we come to your committee with all the different sources and whatever new information we have for that week.
Okay, very good.
Because I think we saw that it was quite a bit of, at one point, there was a huge $150 million potential, impact on us. And I just haven't seen something else that says, here's, at least today we heard $3 million, there may be some others that gas tax that we'll hear about.
Yeah, but I think when we heard the first amount of money, it was also included in all of the Prop 40, Prop 12 projects. That was, I think, $95 million of projects that we were waiting for funding. So I think that was part of that original dollar amount. And let the record reflect Mr. Rosenthal has joined us.
Yeah, we're happy to be here, too.
Mr. Smith, you have anything?
No, not at this point.
Okay. All right, we can go to items 9 and 10.
Right. Item number 9 are presentations from the Department of Fire and Police Pensions and Los Angeles City Employee Retirement System relative to the impact of portfolios on the general fund.
Look at that woman smiling.
She's great.
She never used to smile before.
Happy it's not budget.
Who would like to start off?
I'd be happy to. My name is Mike Perez. I'm the General Manager of the Fire and Police Pension System. I'm here today with Laura Guglielmo to my right and our Chief Investment Officer, Tom Lopez. As I understand it, the reason we're here is to address the issues the Budget and Finance Committee has over the large increase in contributions expected to be made by the city in July of 2010. So what we have before you is a brief handout, 3 or 4 pages long, that provide a few different bits of information about our pension system with summary information about some steps that we think our board can take to deal with the impact of those contributions on the city's finances. The system is very mindful of the tremendous increase in contributions, and we're going to take a serious look at whatever we can do to deal with that impact. First of all, our recent performance, we've got 2 bits of information there. For the period ending 6/30/08, our 1-year return is negative 4.58%. This is from the last fiscal year. For the 1-year period ending 12/31/08, our return is negative 26.7. This is in line with what's happening around the world. Took a look at one of the investment articles last week about the Yale endowment system. Their returns for the calendar year were negative 25%. Their premier system, and they've got that return, I believe, without marking down the write-offs for private equity and real estate. Our funded status as of the last valuation was 99.1% in our pension plan, 41.8% for health, and 92.6% combined. So next figures will be available in November 2009. They'll be based on our returns for the period ending 6/30/09, and we expect there to be a tremendous change in our funded ratio. Now, we've taken a variety of steps to deal with the market condition and the change that have gone on in the market. The board has consulted with staff, our investment advisors, and our consultants a variety of times to evaluate our asset allocation and our portfolio. We've got the top consultants and advisors in the world, and right now our portfolio makes sense, although the board will continue to monitor that. We've identified areas of possible risk. For example, our pension roll is $75 million a month. Capital calls from private equity and real estate are around $40 million. So we've got around $110 million per month requirement for cash. So we're very mindful of making sure that we have enough cash on hand so that we do not have to sell our assets at a fire sale price. We've also,
Could you go to those 2 figures again?
the monthly roll is about $75 million a month, and the cash requirement for capital calls, these are commitments we've made to real estate funds or private equity funds. That monthly commitment is averaging around $45 million. So every month we've got to come up with $110, $115 million for cash. So what we've done is Tom's done a great job, is making sure that we've got sufficient assets on hand that don't require us to sell equities for a fire sale price or something else at a price that doesn't make sense for the fund. We've also taken a really hard look at our securities litigation program, and what we've done is gotten out of more risky corporate investments and into safer government investments there. We're constantly reviewing the performance of our managers, and in fact, over the last few months, we've terminated our relationship with 2 of our active managers, and just a couple of weeks ago, put the assets from one of those managers into a better performing index fund that costs us significantly less money to run. We're also communicating with our members at all times. More recently, we paid close attention to our budget to make sure that in how we operate the system, we're very cognizant of how the rest of the city has had to deal with a budget downturn and the effects on their own operations. Now, I've got in the next section a line that's in red, and it's very rare that we put something like this in a memo, and the reason we do it is because of the importance that it has. It's actually, I believe, the first page in the handout that Lacers did as well. The formula is something that the actuary drills into our board and staff all the time. Contributions plus investment earnings equals benefit payments plus expenses. Now, the contributions are what the employer and the employees put in the system. This year, the city's putting in about $324 million into the pension system, fire and police alone. The employees are contributing around $110 million. They contribute mostly around 9% of salary. The investment earnings, we're not making earnings this year. We've got a negative, and this is up-to-date information as of the end of February of this year. So from July 1 to February, we're talking about a negative 30% return that we have right now. If we add in the valuations from private equity and and real estate that we've got to do, if we ended it right now, we'd have a worse return than that. Okay. So those are the earnings that we've got. They're negative earnings right now. Those two together equal the benefit payments plus expenses. Expenses is what it costs us to operate the system. Those are pretty static. We've held the line on those. The benefit payments is what the city has control over, whether it's payroll, the benefits that we have for pensions, health benefits, dental benefits, and all down the line. I've spoken with union reps from both police and fire about the situation that we're in. Basically, it's a situation that calls for a lot of different entities in the city's family working together to cut back on the cost of these benefits. This is one of the few areas we can do something about, and we know we can. What I'd like to do is move on to that third bullet point under there, and that's where the board confers with our actuary to adopt a funding methodology. And that's something I know that your committee had an interest in. We smooth our assets over a 5-year period so that we don't have huge fluctuations in the city's contribution. However, what we do is we say that we have a corridor. If the value of those smooth assets, if it goes through that corridor, we can't smooth the assets over a 5-year period. We have to do it in a much shorter period of time, and that's what's driving up the contributions for next year. Now, what we're doing...
Explain the corridor again.
It's called an 80-120 corridor. Our assets right now are valued over a 5-year period of time. It's called an actuarial value of assets, AVA. That value of assets is not real, but it's close. It ought to be very close to what the market value of assets is. But because it's smoothed over a 5-year period of time, sometimes it can deviate significantly away from the market value of assets. So if it deviates either 80 or 120% around that market value of assets, then the actuary does a calculation to smooth those assets over like a 2-year or less than 2-year period of time. Essentially, the smoothing period goes away if we go through the market corridor. That's a significant issue and one that's driving up the contributions next year. Now, there's been a little bit of confusion about this, and I'd like to go in a little background on it. Back in January, our board had a presentation from our actuary, and our board was told by the actuary that there was a possibility to take a look at eliminating the market corridor so that we would be able to smooth assets over a 5-year period as we customarily do. However, in a more recent presentation given to the Lacers board, the actuary discovered this new standard that they've got to adhere to. It's called the Actual Standard of Practice number 44. Essentially, it says that they have to make sure that if they deviate away from the market value of assets, it's got to be done over a reasonable period of years. It's very difficult to find what reasonable is, but in their view and in the view of their lawyers, it's got to be a short number of years. What we're doing on our side is the board has directed the actuary to come back to them with options, how to deal with that corridor and how to deal with the 5-year or 7-year smoothing issues. Come back with options, and then the board should decide on options to have further studied by our fiduciary council. And the reason for doing that is to make sure that we're in a situation so years from now, someone takes a second look at what we're doing, we don't end up in a situation like San Diego did. We want to make sure we have a really good process in place that's well vetted and that's fully justified. I think the only other point I can make is the last line that we have, and that's the underlying one. If we move away from the market corridor or smooth over a longer period of years to reduce the city's contribution, it doesn't take away that contribution. The city still has to pay it in subsequent years, and in fact, we'll have to pay it with an additional 8% because that's what we assume we're going to make. So that's my presentation. I'll be happy to take any questions.
We briefly touched on this at a prior meeting. Could you explain to us the issue of the 8%? And we were told that if you reduce the 8%, it costs more in the longer term.
Yes, sir.
how that occurs?
Our actuaries assume over a very long period of time, 30 or 40 years, that the system is going to make an 8% return. If we increase that assumption to 9%, the city's contribution will go down because we assume we're going to make more money on our assets. If we lower that assumption from, say, 8 to 7%, we're going to make less money on our assets. Therefore, the city's contribution will have to go up.
Now, is that 8% assumption, is that we have to earn that amount of money in order to keep the people that are on pension and your expenses fluid, that $110 million a month? Is that what it's based on?
Well, that assumption is used along with a lot of other assumptions to make sure that we're properly funded. So if we meet all the assumptions that we have, how long are people going to live in retirement, how many of them are actually going to retire versus taking a refund of contributions and leaving the city. If all of our assumptions come true, then we're 100% funded. At that point in time, however, we have what's called a normal cost, and that normal cost is a percentage that has to be paid by the employer against payroll. So if we're 100% funded, the costs don't go away. They continue, but it's a level percent of pay that the employer contributes to the system. And I believe that percent right now for our system is about 18%, something like that.
So even if you're 100% funded, the city still has a contribution to make each year?
That's right. And what happened in past years, back in the late 90s and 2000, 2001, we were over 100% funded. At our height, I think we were 115%. So the city's contribution actually went down to a level of around $90 million around 2000, 2001. So I know that one of the ideas you've had, Councilman Parks, is to have a rainy day fund. It makes a lot of sense in those times when we're over 100% funded, as we were back then.
But I mean, but again, if I understand the way you explained it, without a rainy day fund, that overage of the windfall month or years, they go into the 5-year smoothing to take up the slack when you're below.
Yeah.
So it's not taken out, but you basically are adjusting for it.
That's right. When the idea behind the 5-year smoothing is to get rid of those fluctuations in the city's contribution. So on average, our expectation is to make 8%. So if we do on average make 8%, the city contributions should pretty much be a level percent of pay as long as everything else being equal in terms of the other assumptions we're making.
But if there was this rainy day fund, that would basically be earmarked specifically for the city's contribution in the down years.
If that's the way it's designed, yes.
Okay, and that would mean that rainy day fund would not be invested along with your ongoing investments on the larger fund. It would be, what, a separate?
Well, I would recommend giving the assets to the pension system.
No, I'm saying, but would it be invested like all the other funds, but maintained in a separate fund if there were a rainy day fund?
I don't know. I don't know how how one's designed right now. I'm not aware of any other funds that have one.
That's actually called a Stabilization Fund. Some other states have implemented that, and in fact, I think there's some ideas floating around about Stabilization Trust Fund. So it's established in that way. It's set up for the purpose of paying pension contributions or pension benefits, but the delta or the additional earnings you make, you could put into that fund, and then in times when times are tough budgetarily, you can pull from those funds. And then it's invested outside of the pension system, and in some cases, you have the pension system managing that as well. But there are different models out there. But there's not a lot of experience in that area. I think this is something new that's being considered.
It would appear that if you had a rainy day fund and you invested it similarly to the pension fund, you'd be under the same issues of the ups and downs.
Right, and you probably would want something more stable because you're going to have a different liability stream. So you would want something that's less volatile than the normal portfolio of a large pension fund.
When did you say you're going to take up these items of the corridor and the smoothing?
We're actually meeting with fiduciary counsel and our actuary tomorrow. And based on that discussion, our actuary is going to get their marching orders on what to bring back to the board. And that should happen, they should be coming back to the board in late April or early May. the board will take action on that and determine options for fiduciary counsel, and they should take about 2.5 months. So sometime in July or August, and in time to affect the 2010-11 budget, our board should be able to make a decision.
2010, not 9-10.
The 9-10 budget, that's already determined.
Okay, so your that contribution's already set.
Yes.
Well, can we tie it into the other part of the city family first?
Sure.
And the full picture? Because obviously, we need to know the total dimensions, and of course, I have a lot of questions for you. It's the same for her.
Okay.
That's right. I'm Sally Choi, General Manager of Lacers, and I'm here with Tom Moutis, our Assistant General Manager. The Lacer story is similar to that of the fire and police pensions. Lacers, like all other institutional investors, has been deeply impacted by the adverse market conditions in the capital markets. Just to give you perspective, from the peak of October 2007 to today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is off by 53%. Lacers for that same time period is down 40%. So our diversification has worked, but it hasn't really kept us from harm. So we've seen tremendous decline in our market values. But the market decline has really impacted all large investors, and that's really the moral of the story today, which is impacting the city's contribution into the future. We provided a presentation for you just to give you some background information and a bit of education of what goes into determining the city's contribution. So if you'd like to refer to the handout, the city's contribution,
This goes in what?
this goes in the back. Yeah, that's the bad news that we're going to end with. Sorry. So the city's contribution is, as Mike explained, the very simple formula of contributions plus investment earnings equals benefit payments plus expenses. So as your investment income goes down under this algebraic formula, your contributions are going to go up. Otherwise, you reduce the other side of the equation, which is the benefits and expenses. The city's contribution is expressed as a percentage of payroll. This is calculated by the actuary every year as of June 30th, 2008. The actuary values the value of our assets and looks at our liability and determines what that contribution should be. And this is adopted annually by the board. And subsequent to that, then we submit to the city's contribution. So if you look at the historical contribution rates over the last 5 years, you'll see that we went from fiscal year 04-05 of 14.3% of pay to 20.17% of pay. That's your current contribution rate, which is included in the 08-09 budget. We've also provided to the city the contribution rate for next fiscal year, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. So you'll see that the contribution rates on the most part is pretty level, and that's really attributed to the asset smoothing. But there are many factors that affect cities' contributions. That is the Lacers investment returns, the annual returns, the Lacers benefits as adopted in the administrative code, the city's payroll, because it's a percentage of payroll, so that's your base, the funding methods, which we'll talk about, and the actuarial assumptions. That's how many people are going to retire, how long people are going to live, how old you are when you retire, and the benefit payments. So the most important thing that's affecting us today is really our investment performance. And this tells a story of our recent investment performance on annualized returns. June 30th, 2008, the annual return was minus 5.7%. As Mike had indicated before, we also have an assumption that we're going to make 8% on average every year over a long period of time, 30, 40 years. So we're well below that. That minus 5.7 is really minus 13.7, right? Because we not only negative returns, we didn't meet our 8%. This calendar year ending December 31st, our returns were negative 27%. So this is pretty consistent with what we've seen other institutional investors experience across the nation. So all pension funds are feeling this pain. And then as of today, that's even worse story because we had the worst, one of the worst weeks in the market last week. So we're down to about 31% right now. So that's what's really driving some of the problems ahead. Now, there are many different actions that the board is taking, and we're taking very aggressive action. One is really looking at our asset allocation. We look at this every 3 years, but really more closely this time around because it's a question of have the fundamentals changed in the marketplace? Does asset allocation still work? Under, portfolio theory, you have asset diversification, meaning that things are, you look for things to diversify, but right now, everything is correlated. Even real estate, private equity, venture capital, everything is correlated to the market. So we're seeing something very unprecedented right now. So we're looking at that very closely and doing various modeling to see what the appropriate asset allocation should be. But in the meanwhile, we're maintaining our asset allocation. We're not rebalancing. Normally, you have a target of how much you're going to put in stocks, how much you're going to put in fixed income, real estate, other alternatives, and you stay within a target range, right, to maintain that diversification. But right now we are out of balance, meaning we have a target of about 60% in equities. Well, we're below that just because the market has declined so much. Under normal circumstances, you would rebalance. You would shift assets around to bring your equities back into target. Well, we're not doing that because if we did that, we would just lose more money. So we're managing that very, very closely. And as Mike had indicated too, cash is a major issue. Where we normally get income from our investments, we don't have enough to cover our retirement payroll. Our retirement payroll is about $60 million a month. So that is the first and foremost priority for the system, is to ensure that we make our retirement benefit payments. So we're also doing a lot of cash flow analysis and managing our cash effectively.
Let me ask you, is this figure is fairly close, not close, but it's a similar figure that was given by police fire? What is your operating expense per month? If the 60 million goes out for, I guess, people that are on pension.
Right. Our annual budget is about 15 million for our operating expenses. Investment expenses is about 48 million a year. 15 million a year is our operating budget. And then for investment expenses, it's about 48 million. That's management fees, consultant fees.
How many?
48 million.
14. So you're dealing with about 30 million expenses, if I understand.
Are you talking about the monthly expenses?
I'm trying to get a monthly expense to go along with the 60 million.
I'll forget that figure for you. I don't have that off the top of my head.
But the two figures you gave us was roughly about
annual.
30 million annually.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right. So as a percentage of our assets, now both expenses are paid out of our assets. So roughly that is less than a percentage, 1% of our total assets. The other thing that we're also seeking and working with other leading pension funds across the nation is really advocating for regulatory reform in the financial markets. One of the things that's really impacting the market system is the lack of confidence. And we are urging the SEC and the Obama administration and everyone that's in the developing the new regulations to improve transparency, systematic risk, corporate governance, and better managing of enhancing the role of the SEC. So that will help stabilize the markets. And that's really what we need first and foremost to help us get back on track. Because the projections that we're going to present to you are based on estimates. The city's contribution is based on the returns as of June 30th. So we don't know where we'll be June 30th just yet. Hopefully the actions that the federal government is taking will have some benefit, and we'll see some effects of that within the next few months. So LACER's benefits, we have a defined benefit plan. So benefits are generally guaranteed to all active LACER's members. And it's based on years worked and highest salary and the benefit factor. Now, this could be changed for future employees. Next is the calculation of city's contribution, as I mentioned, is a percentage of payroll. So if you look at the formula, it's the percentage of payroll times the payroll for LACER's covered employees. This is your civilian payroll. So if you look at over the last 5 years, the contribution rates. And I should also point out that the city is better positioned than many other pension systems in that the city does actuarially fund the retiree health benefits. Like other cities and counties and states, they do a pay-as-you-go for retiree health. The city's been pre-funding it since 1987, so that's something that we should be very proud of, and it's not very common. So LACERS, fire and police.
Page 8 is what you're referencing.
Right, so that combined contribution is for both the retiree health and the pension benefit cost. So it may appear a little bit higher than maybe other pension systems because they don't do the same thing. They don't include the health. So if you look at the contributions rates, it went from 18.96 to what is expected for next fiscal year is 19.43. And you'll see the covered payroll. So this is in billions. So you'll see as the payroll grows, the dollar amount grows. And one important thing to note is that even if the contribution rate were to remain static, let's say it didn't change at all, as long as your payroll base increased, your contribution amount would still increase, right? Because it's a percentage of that base. So, and to give you scope, the city's payroll has nearly doubled in the last 10 years.
Let me just ask one quick question. Is that if, and people have been talking about the potential of people leaving and getting a golden handshake and whatever, but if I understand what you're saying is that if a person merely moves into the pension system because they're eligible, on the one hand, those benefits that they achieve are being paid out by the pension system, so they merely transfer from the payroll to the pension system. If we fill that position behind them, then the contribution doesn't slow down.
That's right.
Right. But the issue is, as we talk about furloughs and layoffs and things of that nature, then to remove people from the payroll, either temporarily, I guess to be removed permanently from the payroll, then what is the biggest impact on the pension system? Those that are eligible to get a pension or those that are ineligible to get a pension?
So if you look at just reducing the workforce, which will in essence reduce your payroll. So you will have short-term savings. You will have savings on the general fund on the salaries, and then you'll have savings on the city's contribution amount because it's based on a lower base. Now, if you make that permanent reduction, then you will have that as long-term savings. If you start replacing those people, then you, again, increase your costs.
Okay, but if you move people, large numbers, into the pension system and they start collecting their benefits, then you still...
So it's shifting the cost to the
there.
pension. Right.
And so the issue is your expectation of 8% our city contribution is going to be consistent if the numbers move over in large numbers and the city's payroll remains the same.
Right. It all depends on that backfill rate. So if you have a number of people leaving this system, then it will save on the general fund side, as you mentioned, and then you're shifting the cost to the pensions. Now, in some ways, that will reduce that cost temporarily as well, because your normal cost, your cost allocation for the year will be reduced because you have fewer people. Right, so it may save a little bit on that end. So that'll be a short-term cost. As long as you don't backfill those, then you can maintain those savings. As soon as you start backfilling it, not only are you, again, increasing the liability, because future liability of that new person coming in, but it also adds to the payroll base. So the key is backfill. If you don't backfill, you will save. If you do backfill, it will, again, increase costs.
Is there another key as far as determining at what point they're in their employment career?
Yes.
If they have invested versus vested?
Right. If they have invested, then the only liability we have is to refund the employee's contribution. If they have more than 5 years, they'll know eligible for some type of retirement. And that's all included in the actuarial evaluation. So there's assumptions made as to how many people are going to leave, how long people are going to stay, and how many people are going to retire. So the sooner you retire, that means you're going to pay longer in retirement benefits, right? And now,
They're eligible.
and people are living longer, so we pay out the benefits even longer,
If they're eligible when they leave.
if they're eligible when they leave.
And so I was going to ask, isn't there really two questions here? One, if we do a payout, a buyout of people to get them off the system, more likely to be senior people getting close to that retirement age that would take the buyout of the golden handshake, which really impacts the system, versus we lay off because of our bumping policies, et cetera, that it's going to be the lower level people younger in their careers that aren't going to collect immediately in the system. Would that be a correct assumption?
Right, except that it depends on what the buyout is. If you're talking about a retirement enhancement, that's increased benefits. That means increased costs.
Right.
Now, if you lay off, there's no additional cost. You save on the payroll, and then it will save on the pension side as well, potentially. Because some
At least
of
in
them
the
may
short
have
term.
less than 5 years, so then you're getting rid of that liability.
And a lot of others are going to be midterm in their career. They can't retire. They're too young, so they're going to keep their money in the system for a while, which gives you a chance to catch up. So I think layoffs versus a buyout program would be much more beneficial for the pension system, wouldn't it? Okay.
Pension system and the
And have you done any actuarial design numerically? Do you know what those kind of numbers are? Out of every 100 employees, how many would tend to be able to draw down on the system or just go out into another job somewhere?
Well, we have a number of different breakdowns that we've done. Just so you know, on average or over the last few years, the retirement factor has been typically 10 to 12% of those eligible to retire actually retire. That's 10 to 12% a year.
That's very nice.
We've seen a decrease in that in the last 6 to 8 months.
Right.
Yeah,
And for a number of reasons,
Yeah.
because LA County has experienced the same decline, and there are no rumors of early retirement incentive over there. There are a number of things. One is the economy. People don't know what's happening. They're uncertain, feel uncomfortable. So, and then they've seen their deferred comp accounts, be wiped out. So that was something that they were counting on when they were going to retire. That's one factor. The other factor is COLAs. So they know that they can expect COLAs, especially for those in the coalition, what's coming. And then the third for us are the rumors of a possible early retirement incentive.
I did have,
So,
Sure, I understand this. The idea of early retirement doesn't really help us. If, in fact, those that might take early retirement are critical right now in their jobs for us. And secondly, the payout on the other side will be real. That's not going to really fix anything, in my opinion. Do you kind of agree with that?
it all depends on the design. Based on experience of other states and municipalities that have done early retirement incentives, in general, they have not worked for the mere fact of backfilling.
Yeah.
So that's the piece that's hard to control. Because with retirement incentives, any kind of retirement benefit cost, the cost doesn't go away. If you add a benefit, then you're creating an unfunded liability, something that we have not funded up, ahead of time. So you have to basically amortize that or pay that off over 15 to 20, 30 years. But then you still have the ongoing cost even after that because they're still there, and then the beneficiaries. So that's something to remember. That cost never goes
The
away.
reason I want to
But-
remember it is this downturn, even the most optimistic conversations people are having, has it flattening out maybe at the end of this year or half of next year, and then a period of years before it'll bring us back to where we were just 6 months ago. I'm not hearing anybody else saying it's a quick fix.
Right.
And without that being the case, then it's the backfilling and it's the real running of our government. I mean, we got to run our government. And people who are in their 40s and 50s, who are key players, and they don't want to leave anyhow right now, because nobody knows what the future is the next day after tomorrow. It really is. It's very scary for everybody. So, that whole concept of early retirement, I think, maybe had sense in other years past. I just personally, in my gut, don't think it helps the situation at all. How do you feel? You feel the same way on that?
I don't think people would be waiting for it if they didn't think there was value in it. They're waiting because they're going to be better off with it. And I would just add on that the city has not pre-funded that. So all those years that, if say there's 5 years that are given away age and service, that hasn't been paid for by the employer nor the employee. Neither one's put money in the system to pre-fund that. So I think it's expensive, and it's got to be looked at very carefully.
Now, if I may get to the real meat.
Yeah.
So the city's contribution rate is going down next fiscal year for fiscal year 09-10, and that's been built into the CAO's scoping in the budget preparation. So that's already built in. So the contribution rate is actually going down next year, and that's really because of our assets moving. We had 4 previous years of double-digit returns, so we got to recognize all of that, even with a 1 year of negative returns. But the problem is the year following. This year, that does not reflect the current market conditions, so depending on what happens June 30th. We did a number of different scenarios. Both Lacers and Fire and Police Pensions had our actuary run some numbers for us. Now, there were like 6 different scenarios that we did, but I believe that the CAO used a midpoint in their forecast. So it's slide 13. We'll start with Lacers. This is assuming that June 30th we'll have investment losses of 25%, and then the following year that we have 0% return, and then the year after that 8%, and so on. So it's showing basically no optimism and that the market is not going to recover. So assuming minus 25%, our contribution rates over the next 5 years will increase from the 19.43 for next fiscal year to 28% of pay. And then by fiscal year 2014-15, which is the June 30th, 2013, it will increase to over 40% of pay. So if you look at the same scenario for fire and police pensions, the story is actually worse. You'll see that now in here you'll see that we did 3 scenarios. So you see if minus 20%, minus 25%, or minus 30%, and that gives you the scale. So from their point of close to 28% of pay, it will increase, assuming, let's say, the minus 25% loss, anywhere between, I think it's 75% of pay. Now, in actual dollar amounts, that is slide 15, you'll see the contribution amount. Now, one thing that's built into this assumption or this chart is that payroll is going to increase on average 4.25% a year. That's the assumption that the actuary uses. That's inflation across the board, salary increases, step increases, promotions. So that's what's built into this. So the number could be much better if
you say payroll, you're saying dollar payroll or numbers of people on payroll?
Dollar payroll, right. So if you look here, the green bar is fire and police pensions, the blue is Lacers, and the white is the combined. So for next fiscal year, Lacers and fire and police pensions combined will be close to the, this is valuation year, let's see. So for next fiscal year, it's going to be around $700 million combined. The following year, June 30th, 2009 valuation year, which is fiscal year 10-11, that it will increase to $1.3 billion. And then if you project that forward to 2013, it will be over $2 billion combined. Now, that is assuming 25% market loss on June 30th, and then we have one additional handout. The actuary also ran this table assuming a 30% loss. And if you base it on today's performance, that's probably the more likely scenario that we'll see. And again, this is just an estimate. It is projection. It's not a forecast, because we can't forecast the market, but it just gives you a sense of what lies ahead. And because of the asset smoothing, as Mike mentioned, even though we do the 5-year smoothing, the magnitude of our losses are so significant that the smoothing does not help. A 25%, a 30% loss in statistical terms is a 4 standard deviation event. It's not supposed to happen. So this is unprecedented, and this is something that every pension system is facing, every municipality is having to deal with. What's happening in the market is just, affecting every aspect of city government and benefits alike.
Did the CAO and their projections include, is this part of the $500 million additional loss in the subsequent year?
Yes. Our projections, what Sally has been saying is that our projections, we had taken one of the middle estimates of the 3 estimates they have, and what Sally is saying is that where they are today is actually beyond the upper range of what even we estimated.
And I would add that the point in time where they made those estimates, negative 25 was a reasonable number to use. But a lot has happened since the time they started. Right now, the negative 30 that we use as the worst estimate is maybe now at the lower range of the estimates.
But because the market is so volatile, it's really hard to say day to day. And so this is something that we would work very closely with the CAO on to keep them informed of what's actually happening. And so as we get closer to June 30th, we'll have a better idea of what to expect. And we'll be monitoring this and communicating this to you as we go along. And in the meantime, we're looking at long-term policies, as Mike had mentioned, the asset smoothing. The other thing we're looking at is the market corridor. We're also looking at amortization periods. Those are all long-term policies that will help you in the long term, but it won't change the impact in the next 5 years, just because the losses are just so astounding.
I'm just curious, is there any, both of you, I mean, it's 5 more months or 4.5 months before the end of June. Is there anything we can do at this point, in any way, shape, or form, that could lessen our exposure by the end of June? I don't want to panic, I don't want to do anything crazy, but is there anything, the Titanic is the Titanic. The truth of the matter is what we're experiencing. Is there any way to immediately take a deep breath and do something?
Cutting payroll. What we get,
that would be
what we get is based on payroll. It's real simple. The other is to take a look at the benefits on a going forward basis and to do that as soon as possible. In fact, I've looked at the pension system it's been in operation since 1899.
Yeah.
So there's been different cycles. When things are going well, the benefits go up. And in bad times, the benefits go down. So back in '79, there was a town hall study done. And the city and some Blue Ribbon Committee people took a look at the 3 systems in the city and actually made recommendations on how to lower the costs by implementing new tiers. And that may be one of the things you take a look at.
Do we have a hiring freeze right now so that we don't have a new tier of new staff? I mean, where are we with the employment picture of hiring new employees?
Yes, in general, we have a citywide hiring freeze. There's been some exemptions granted to that, but yes.
But then both of you have suggested that if we think of another tier, now's the time to realistically think of another tier because of the reality of what you've just projected.
And for other reasons too. One is really what kind of workforce do you want? You want to design a new benefit tier that is aligned to the type of people you want to recruit and the type of people you want to retain. So it's really a matter of looking at, how long do you want people to work? Things of that nature that will help define the new tier. It will save on new employees. It'll lower the cost for future employees, but it will not lower the cost for your current employees.
Well, I would also add that back in 1979, when that study was done, they implemented a charter change in 1980. That's when Tom and I started our city careers, and we were 25% funded at that point. So we went well over 100%. So those changes that were made were significant, but they occurred over a long period of time. I'd also add that the hiring freeze does not apply to sworn personnel. And we get a percentage of their pay as part of the contribution from the city to our system.
Yeah, my other question inherent in all of that is, have we done any initial discussions with the unions about the story of our present moment and where we are, and how are those discussions going?
Well, that's really a question for the CAO, but we have done briefings with some of the coalition or the union members, so they know the 5-year cost projections. And then going back to your original question of what can we do immediately, the other option is increasing employees' contribution. That would have to be worked out with the unions, but that's another way that will help mitigate
To increase employees' contribution, what is the percentage of the contribution now?
So for Lacer's employees, people hired after 1983 pay 6% of pay.
How much?
6% of pay.
6%.
There's a different formula for those hired before 1983. On average, they pay 2 to 3% based on the city picks up part of their contribution.
So what were you going to say?
The benefits for sworn employees, for the pension benefits, are in the charter. And I understand the next charter change is going to be in 2011. Health benefits for retirees, dental and health, they're in the administrative code. So that's within the purview of the council.
And what are the rules on?
So for Lacer's benefits, it's done by ordinance. It's different than fire and police. So theirs requires charter change for LACER's active employees.
If you were to take your point a step further, what would the percentage recommendation be in going forward with what existing employees, should be responsible for or not, or whatever?
I really couldn't say what's appropriate. It's really a matter of how much do you want to shift to the employee, right? It's the total contribution. Right now, we've only been talking about the city's contribution, but the actuary looks at the total cost, which includes employee contribution and the city's. So it depends on how you want to balance that out.
Yeah. Can those discussions happen, though, right now in the sunlight in the next 30, 60 days?
Well, I think some conversations, which are welcome to come to the EERC meetings that have those discussions, it is a negotiation kind of issue, so there have been some discussions there that maybe in the next one you can.
I mean, the question for all of us is, do we do something now when we know the picture is what it is? And does it also mean, and you guys can tell me if I'm right or wrong, that if we don't do something now, meaning over the next period of time, open discussions and transparency and all of that, it just gets worse, is what I think I'm hearing you both say.
Right, but you do have time to plan. I mean, that's the point of us providing these projections, because you know what the rate's going to be next fiscal year, and you're building your budget for that now. This is really going to impact you fiscal year 10-11. So there's time to plan. So the more you do up front, the easier it's going to make it for you, later down the road.
Let me ask another question. You mentioned earlier the most immediate impact would be reducing the dollar value of your payroll.
Mm-hmm.
But isn't there another step? If we just say everybody took 2 days off per month non-paid, you'd reduce the value of your payroll, but you're still paying 100% benefits. So it seems like it's the second step in there. They have to come off of not just work less, they have to come off the roll.
Right, because that's a temporary savings, right? That's a one-time savings. What we're looking for is more of reducing the base.
So there's basically a two-phase issue. There's got to be a group that leave the payroll, and there has to be a group that works less.
Right, you will have some recognition of that, because if, the actuary assumes that the payroll is going to be a certain amount, so there'll be an actuarial gain. So people earned less than we had assumed, so we'll have a slight gain.
But the amount of the benefits are 100% of the benefits.
Right.
I was going to say that was an interesting point you got out there, because on the civilian side, understand if, let's say a person's suspended for 3 days out of the 10-day period of time they work in 2 weeks, the pension contribution taken out is taken out as if they were there for the entire 10-day period, so they get service for that. On the sworn side, they don't. We don't give them credit for those 3 days they were suspended. So there's little tweaks like that can be done if you're looking at a new system that make a significant difference. And those are some of the things that were done in the variety of tiers that we administer. The other thing I point out, just as a bit of information, is the retirees in our system are affected by a provision of the charter that regulates their increases to their checks. And it's based on the CPI. If the CPI goes up, then their payments go up. But if the CPI goes down, charter language says their retirement payments go down. And the CPI for the period of time that we use hasn't been calculated yet. There's 1 month left in it, but right now it's negative 0.3. So there is a chance that the retirees will take a reduction in their pay.
But that's not in LACER's, right?
No.
That is voted on by your board, correct?
Well, it's by the ad code. So it's by ordinance that this retiree COLA is established. So it's 3%. It's a 3% cap, but it's linked to the CPI. We use a different time period than fire and police pensions does. Ours is the annual average. So we actually will see a cost of living increase for retirees next year of 3%. And then we also have a bank. So in those years where the CPI is more than 3%, you bank the balance of that into.
But is it mandatory? I thought on the LACER's side it was voluntary on the part of the board to vote it.
No, that's set in stone. There is an additional provision that's a discretionary COLA that the board can recommend to the council and mayor, or to the council. It's really the council that determines if there's a discretionary, an additional COLA that could be provided.
Our board, to clarify, our board does adopt the actuary CPI increase. They do have to take an action, but it really is driven by the actuary and the CPI in the LA area.
Mr. Perez, let me ask you, when you mentioned 78 when you came on, those changes in the pension system that came with the tier, and I think they had a 10-year pension and a variety of things, but most of that went by the wayside on the most recent changes that brought it back to a 20-year pension and 33 at 90 and all of that.
That's when the cycle was going back up, so we had good times, and we gave them better benefits.
Are most all of those, I guess, the 78, 10-year pension things, those people have moved on?
Yeah, they either moved on or they switched over to Tier 5. Right. And what happened, in Tier 5 was interesting because we had people from the tier that started in 67, Tier 2. There was a lot of active people in that tier there. And that's the one where they get a 70% pension, unlimited cost of living increase, and the pension's based on their final rate of pay versus a final year. There's other tweaks too, but those are the basic provisions. Those people had the opportunity to transfer into Tier 5, where it had a 90% pension after 33 years of service. For the people that did, that was a gain to our pension system, because our actuaries calculated that Tier 5 was a less expensive system than Tier 2, so we actually had some gains offset by the losses from the Tier 3 and 4 people that went into Tier 5.
Yeah, but are we, when would be the next time to have another update from?
You know, I was going to see whether, with this information we've had today, it may be the most extensive, whether we need to move this to the council, that you can come and brief the entire council on what you've given us with these charts and graphs.
Be very helpful.
And so what we may think about, I think we only have 2 days of council this week. If maybe we can plan for next Tuesday. Following week.
Following week.
Following week.
League of Cities.
Is that the same?
Yeah.
the League of Cities?
Next week.
Oh, okay.
Next week.
So a week from next.
Tomorrow.
And the other
Heidi?
thing that I would like to offer is to bring our system actuary also. He's an authority on pension benefits, and he can tell you what's happening across the nation, too, if you want that additional expertise.
I hope that you mentioned that the standard deviation is now 4 times normal. I would hope that the board is thinking in the terms that we're not going to fix today the problems, but that it's for the future. That every time, if we ever get even to 2 or 3 times standard deviation, that we have something in place at that point, not today.
Right, we're looking at the long-term policies, and the actuary is working on a number of different studies.
Okay. Let me, we'll get a date and after League of Cities and get scheduled so we can come before the council. If you can bring that same material for each member, it would be helpful. Mr. McQuiston, you had a card in for number 9 before we go to number 10.
All right, I'm going to see this guy. Do I need to stay here? Or you
No.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Britt.
Jim McQuiston, I did want to make one comment. You know, I started investing in the stock market when it was about 250, I think it was, the DJI then, and now it's very much higher. Now, my investment at the DJI of 250, if I computed the rate of return on that particular purchase, it's probably right around 10 or 15,000%. In the retirement investments, I would think these are very long-term investments, so you can't really look at the DJI for today because they were invested a long time ago. And if you use the percentage based on what the payment is on your original investment, it's still a very, very high rate of return. I did want to point that out because it's a little confusing when you hear these people talking about, oh, we've just lost everything and you have to pay more. And I did want to point that out. And the other thing is, in a declining market, what you want to be doing is averaging down. In other words, you want to be investing now, taking advantage of this. If you have any possibility that you have a rosy future in the future, because now is the time to get into the market when it goes down. And it seems like what I've heard is that people are going the other way around. It just doesn't make sense for retirement funds to be thinking about that. So I'm a little bit perturbed hearing what we went through. Remember last back when I talked about the fact that we made a 25% net profit on 1 year, in our general fund, and we didn't put any of that away for rainy day. What we did was we spent it all. And we have to stop doing that. We don't have a rainy day fund. We're not going to get one if we spend our
We've already
rainy
passed
day
that policy.
funds in the good years.
We've actually already passed that policy that we're creating that rainy day fund, so.
Yes.
For the future. It doesn't help us now, but it's a future
Yes,
city council will say thank you.
And I predict that this is going to last quite a long time. It's not going to be over next year. It's not going to be over the year after that. I'm a child of the Depression. I still remember when people lose confidence, they don't get it back fast. And so we're going to have to think about putting money into retirement fund now, because it's going to be worse the next year and the next year and the next year and the next year. And if we lose people now, if we say, okay, we're just going to lay people off, all those people have been working hard for the city, and they're going to say, don't ever work for the city again. We're going to lose that enthusiasm for working for the city. Instead, we have to work on more income for the city, and there is a big pot of income that we can get immediately if we apply ourselves, about $600 million a year. This is what we should be working on. This is what I'm really pushing right now. We've got to do that immediately.
Where does that come from?
Well, we don't want someone else jumping in ahead of us, so I don't want to say this in a public forum, but there is money available.
It's goes in the gutter, no. How about a stimulus package?
No. Okay. But you're working with the mayor's office on that, right? Yes. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's go to item 10.
Item 10 is a CAO and CLA to discuss options for closing the remaining 2008-2009 budget deficit.
We can't change that.
Good afternoon. Maria Gutierrez with the City Administrative Officer's Office. And you know Len Ozawa.
And you're using, now we just got this, the March 9th report?
Yes, actually, after all is said and done, after the council's actions and the addendums and all actions regarding the mid-year, we left off at a remaining deficit of $33.3 million. So that was our starting point. As part of the mid-year actions, you instructed us to come back and report with additional options for further reducing this deficit. In this memo, we've identified approximately $19.5 million to further reduce this $33.3 million deficit to approximately $13.8 million. As part of these reductions, the 19.5 is made up of $16.5 million from the construction of the Vine Street Garage project. An additional $500,000 in surplus funding in the General City Purposes Special Fund Fee Subsidy Reimbursement account. Net savings of approximately $800,000 from various actions within General Services Department. And the expectation that we will generate the remaining approximately $1.68 million consistent with the short-term layoff agreement alternative.
Let me go backwards. How real is that? Because we've gone, 9 months?
To date, as part of the negotiation with the coalition, the expectation was that we would generate approximately $3.1 million in voluntary furlough savings. As of today, we've generated approximately $1.42 million. And this, of course, includes a mixture of general fund and special fund savings.
That's over the first 9 months, 8 8.5.
So of the 3.1 million, we have generated approximately 1.42.
So our view is that we're going to generate 1.6 in the next 3 to 4 months?
There are ongoing conversations with all affected units to make sure that we meet this goal.
Let me just ask on the subsidy fund. Now, that fund covers developmental,
Special events.
special events, so we're saying wipe that fund clean through the end of this fiscal year?
We, based on the, as you know, all requests for a subsidy from this account are forwarded to the CLA and the CAO for review. To date, we have surplus funds available based on what we have received to date. We also anticipate leaving approximately $142,000 in this account even after we were to take the $500,000 to make sure we have sufficient funds to address any potential needs through the year end.
But my only concern is that being that the special event feature of the subsidy has not been implemented, once that's implemented, that will probably be the greater drain on those funds. Whether we've taken into account just what that may mean between now and June 30th, because the developmental fees have dropped significantly, almost to nothing, and we've seen very little activity on the convention center, but we're compressing $10 million of special events into basically a subsidy area that is going to be, it's not going to all go away, and I'm just wondering how much of it do we think will be addressed in the next 3 months in that fund? As I understood, by April, that process should be in play.
That's our expectation, that the process would be in place by April. It's hard to say because some events, the waiver has already been requested for events that are happening later in the year or through the end of the fiscal year. But at this point, having $142,000 may be sufficient.
And then going to MICLA, what would that raise our debt level in MICLA if we moved to 16 million into MICLA versus using the parking fees? Where would that move our MICLA debt?
At this point, it's just, we're giving them, asking for the MICLA appropriation, the CP appropriation. As we understand it, the actual contract award won't happen until August. At that time, a lot can happen between now and August, whether we have SBRF monies that might be able to come in and actually fund the project. If not, then we can move forward with CP, and certainly that's a very low.
Okay, but I mean, if we move that now, we're basically saying to those who are constructing that parking lot that we're going to replace it with another source of funds. Are we saying that that source of funds may not be available until after the fiscal year?
No. I think basically what we're ensuring that right now, because the project is at the bid and award stage, and basically we're offering the MICLA CP money for that project to move forward. However, we don't believe the actual construction will start until summer. There's a lot that can happen between now and then. Certainly if SPRF monies are available, then we can use those. If not, the MICLA CP is available. And we'll update the chart to reflect the minimal impact it would have on it.
For this fiscal year, whatever source they get, they don't need it until after July 1st.
And that's correct.
It'll either be new parking funds or MICLA funds.
Yes. And certainly on, just to sort of address your furlough, I believe we're going to try to have a stronger push over the next couple of months to increase some of those voluntary furloughs, but certainly, as we can see through the first 8 months or so of the year, we haven't quite got to the target.
So this takes us down to just under 14 million.
Yep.
Okay. And so if we keep things within our funding cycle or within budget, then this is our expectation that this number is going to grow a little bit more based on our revenues continuing to drop.
I'm hoping actually it's going to decrease, and I would ask that you actually, move this report to the council, but we would like to have a continuous report back, because we're continuing to look for options to reduce our appropriations this year. Since we just don't have the revenue, we still need to bring our appropriations in line. So this is sort of what I see as the first step. We've mentioned a couple of things that we're going to follow up on and pursue. So we would ask that you allow us to continue to come back and report back on further options.
And then have we talked with General Services on these reallocations?
Yes.
Okay.
I know they have some concerns, but certainly I think we can move in this direction and would be in a good place.
And let me get that figure again. Lynn, on the fee subsidy, we remained 140?
142.
142. Okay. Do we have General Services here?
We scared them away.
Scared them away. You'll have to unlock.
Taking their day off.
They're furloughed.
It's all about timing.
Yep. All right, we'll move the joint CLA March 9th report with the recommendations as stated.
Mr. Chair, this item was on the agenda as a discussion item only. The report only became available today.
What do we do?
So if you,
Next
We
week?
would continue it until the next meeting.
All right.
though, could we ask the committee to actually waive this report and move it to council as quickly as possible?
You know, we have a great reluctance about waiving, but
I-
we'll waive this report. Then we can get it before council, like, this week?
Yes, the sooner the better.
All right. Is that legal?
The chair's office will have to request a special meeting from the council president for Wednesday.
Wednesday? So are we legal? I don't want to be visiting you at Civil Rank.
I was visiting you.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we will do within the legal parameters, get this to council by Wednesday with special meetings, whatever we have to work out with the calendar at the council, but we'll waive that. If we can't do all that, then we'll bring it back
We should be
to the committee on Monday. Okay?
Mr. Parks, did you want to go to closed session or finish
I'd like
off
to do
the?
this. We'll get these attorneys that are on the payroll actually work. So we can go 1 through 6 on closed session.
And then we'll return for items 8 and number 11.
8 and 11, we can't waive 8 and 11?
Watch it.
Are you going to be in there?
Gavin Newsom called me this morning, I didn't take the call yet. Jerry Brown is.
It's going to happen, like it or not.
Jerry Brown. He's going to be there.
All right. Item number 8 is LA for Kids Steering Committee report relative to recommendations regarding projects impacted by the suspension of state grant funds.
Yeah.
Number 8, Prop K.
Lori Hancock with the CAO. In December, the state suspended reimbursement of the state bonds, and that affects the Prop 12 and Prop 40 funding that the city gets for projects that are supervised by the LA for Kids program. In looking at the projects, there were 28 projects that were really going to be affected by the stoppage, and so we identified $17.1 million to fund those projects temporarily from other funding sources. Some of the funds can be allocated permanently, although they are considered loans. They are eligible for all of the funding sources that we have allocated. The state, we do have $95 million worth of grants awarded, and $75 million of that is actually still with the state. So one of the funding sources that we've used, and I think that is critical, is the Public Works Trust Fund. That $9.4 million has been allocated already as loans to the program. This report recommends the reallocation of an additional $3 million that has been awarded to the different projects in the program. We'd like to allocate it to our cash flow pot to help fund some of the 28 projects or 25 projects that we've actually recommended moving forward on. Since this is a loan, there is potentially general fund implications here. If, in the unlikely event that the state does not come back and repay the funds that we've expended on these projects, we would need to find alternate funding sources for these projects, and it could be potentially a hit to the general fund. So, do you have any questions?
Okay. Let me just start off. I have a concern that it appears that in their letter to us, they've given us certain criteria to recontact them, and I think D states that if you're in any contractual relationship, they need to know about that urgency and whether they're impacting us. Have we done that?
Yes. Department of Rec and Parks actually, in working conjunction with the CLA, CAO, and the BOE, put together a list of the projects that were initially affected, and that was sent off, I believe, in early February.
Okay, and all of these projects are part of that list?
Yes, they are.
Okay, and do we have any idea when you might hear back from them?
Well, I contacted OGALS this morning, the administrative grant of the state that administers 12 and 40, and they indicated that they thought this time in summer, sometime in the middle of the summer, they anticipated that they would be able to start selling bonds again, and they would be beginning reimbursements. But they did indicate to us that we should continue to submit bills to them so that when they are ready and up and running and have cash to pay, then it's going to be a first in, first out.
But that would presuppose that we're spending our money.
That is
we're sending bills?
That is correct, and that is the $17.1 million that we identified as potential funding sources for these.
And do you get any sense on this coming election where I think it's $5 or $6 billion that they're putting before the public, where that places them if that doesn't pass as to their bond program?
I think we had earlier stated that if that occurs, they would pretty much have to open up the budget again, and we would be back in the same situation we were a few months ago where we would not know the impacts.
That's my concern when we talk about, we have, I think, almost $2 million to general services already committed from the general fund, but these numbers jump to something in the neighborhood of, 17 million that we could be absorbing in next year's, I would assume next year's general fund if we move forward. And it would have also, it seems like a critical day for the state is whether they pass in the May election what they're proposing, because there's no assurance, even if it passes, that these bonds and our commitment are going to be first on the list. If they don't pass and the budget is reopened totally, it looks like we're starting from scratch. Mm-hmm. And yet we are recommending that we go down a path of committing the city's general fund to $17 million when we just, on one of the items previous, we just closed the budget deficit by 19, and now we're taking on another 17. I was wondering from the strategy standpoint why we didn't use the same logic on this one as we did on 11 on the gas tax, or we just said suspend until money comes in?
Let me answer that, please. Maria Cardenas with the CAO's office. We have $95 million for about 80 projects under Proposition 12 and 40. We had a group of city employees from Rec and Parks, Bureau of Engineering, the mayor's office, the CAO, and the CLA look at those projects and determine which ones were on a critical path. This report, which recommends funding, are for those projects that are in construction or almost complete with construction, where we mostly have private contractors doing the work, where we have substantial liability to the city if we were to stop processing their payment invoices. We have another 40 to 50 projects that have the balance of those state grant monies that we would probably are looking to recommend something more in line with what we did in Prop 1B, where we are not yet in construction, and it's a lot easier to slow down that work. The Public Works Trust Fund loan that we have, it has already been, it's $9 million of it is on the books already, and we've committed to the Public Works Trust Fund that repayment of those funds would occur when the state grant program ends, which would be in 2011 for part of the projects and 2012 for the balance of them. The general
Give me
fund
those dates again for the trust fund?
for 2011 and 2012.
Now, we gave them those dates, but on the other hand, if those funds aren't flowing by then,
If the funds are not flowing at that point, and we'll know as in the coming months whether the state is able to do it, then it would become a general fund liability. So the potential is there that it could be a general fund liability. The assumption that we're making based on the conversations we've had with the state, because these are voter-approved programs, Proposition 12 and 40, is that as soon as they fix their budget problem and they get their bonding capacity back up and they identify their critical projects, which are some streets, bridges, et cetera, that then they would move on to the recreation and cultural facilities. The most imminent impact that we have at this point is about $1 million that we will probably have to show as a reserve fund loan for the Department of General Services for work that they have done on 2 projects.
but now, what is the intent of the Public Works Trust Fund? What is that set up, other than the loans we take out?
I'd have to ask, see if somebody else here. I know that they receive deposit from people that are doing projects in the city, and they hold the money aside
But there's a
until...
stated purpose. I'm just wondering, as we borrow
Sure.
this level of money, how do we conflict with their stated purpose or funds that they'll have to use for the projects they're intended for?
I'd have to get back to you on that. I know that we deal with Craig Bloomquist, and what he does is he does an analysis in terms of his cash needs and immediate needs. There he is.
Good afternoon, David Hirano from the CAO's office. The Bureau of Accounting, or the Office of Accounting in the Board of Public Works, administers the Public Works Trust Fund, and in doing so, they take a look at what the existing cash needs are to maintain the city's commitments. They try and look at kind of a timeline of when those needs are going to be required, and they hold cash back, and they don't make it available for loaning to make sure that they're able to maintain all the city's commitments. So when someone goes forward and proposes a loan from the Public Works Trust Fund, one of the first things that we do is we check with the Office of Accounting, and we make sure that in doing so, that there will not be any impact on the city's ability, projected ability, to meet all its commitments to the people that provide deposits to us.
But the thing is, that's on a timeline of some type that you're expecting a refund or a repayment.
Right. So if the Office of Accounting has, which I assume they have, given approval to this, then it's their opinion that this money can be loaned out without impacting the city's obligations.
The answer you're looking for, it is a holding account for long-term bond commitments for projects. Some go into the decades, so the money just sits there and we can use it if it's not needed in the short term, is what you're saying.
Correct, yeah.
I just have a concern. I don't know, to move this forward on this amount of money, that although these projects are important, I don't know if we got into the budget, $16 million of employee costs wouldn't be equally as important. And it just seems as though we're taking the state at their word that they're going to do something when in fact they're the very ones that not only aren't giving us our money, we have money from '07 that they haven't given us. I mean, so it just seems like we're taking a run on them, and then this whole issue of them unable to even sell bonds recently puts them in even greater jeopardy because of their rating. And so we're kind of moving along funding stuff with no expectation of how we're going to fill the hole in our budget.
The city has an obligation to complete construction of these projects. We have, I believe there's 40 grants. There's 28 projects, 25 of which we're moving, where we have done bid and award, we've mobilized, we're in construction, we have invoices that are coming in. What the city has done is we have about $9 million in Public Works Trust Fund that we have been cash flowing. We use that, we pay the invoice, we bill the state, they reimburse us. The reimbursement portion of that mechanism is what has changed. If we don't move forward and authorize the Public Works Trust Fund monies to be a loan rather than a revolving cash flow, then we would probably need to come up with almost that amount of money to pay the invoices to the private contractors.
And you said every one of these are currently in construction?
All of these are in construction or just about completed construction.
And if I could ask a clarification question too, of the 17 million, I think you had stated that should we not basically get the funding from the state that we thought we were going to get this summer, that the general fund impact would actually be substantially less than the 17 million. We would still carry those loans on the books until the state paid, but the immediate general fund impact would be just the general services?
Right. The immediate impact is $1 million in 2009-10, which is a reserve fund loan. They are appropriations that the mayor and council have made to the Department of General Services with the expectation that the state would reimburse it in this fiscal year. If we don't receive it, then we show it as a reserve fund loan July 1st. The impact of the $13 million is carried over through 2011 and 2012. So we don't have, but we wouldn't have to show that as a reserve fund loan for next
But
year.
the issue is you're taking the money from Public Works. so
We're
they-
making
they
it
don't have
a loan.
it available now, although we wouldn't show it as money coming from the reserve fund for another 2 years. The money's unavailable for Public Works Trust Fund.
Right. The Public Works Trust Fund has already made these loans. What we're doing is we're changing it from a cash flow revolving loan to like a term loan with them.
The only risk would be is if the state ever defaulted on the commitment, then we have to reimburse it at some point down the line.
We
But
would
not
have to-
necessarily in this budget year,
No, and we would have 1 to 2 years to
to figure it all out.
figure that
You
out.
said the earliest would be 10/11 or 11/12?
It's June 2011, June 2012 are the liquidation dates for those state grants.
So that would be next year's budget. We have a year.
9, 10, 10, 11, and 11, 12.
Yeah.
The way the revolving fund is set up now through the Public Works Trust Fund, all of the monies that are in there would actually need to be repaid after the grants close in 2012.
Okay, that's all, but I mean, what is our obligation for fiscal year 10/11? You said there's no funds we have no funds committed for 9/10.
It's a small portion of the $13 million, and I'll get back to you. It's mostly 2012.
Okay, no funds committed for 9/10. You're saying a smaller portion for 10/11 and the bulk?
The bulk in,
11/12.
yes. 1 million in 9/10.
1 million, 9/10, nothing in this fiscal year.
Right.
No, I guess
that's
9/10,
2008-90.
1 million for 9/10, a larger amount for 10 or 11, and then the bulk?
Right.
11/12, okay. All right. Anything else?
I'm just worried about what we're going to hear from the state, right? Do we know when?
December.
Makes sense, December
Mhm.
sometime? And what if it's dramatically different than what we anticipate? And we're going to have to eat it?
We'll have to report back with how we address that. At this point, though, it's more,
The answer is yes.
yes.
The horse is out of the barn.
Right, but we'll have completed projects, at least for these 25, so.
Okay, we'll move that item. Could you give us?
Thank you.
To give the clerk for the committee report, those breakdowns for what our expectation is in '09 and then 10, 11, so we'll have some
Definitely,
idea
yeah.
of what the commitment is? All right?
The next, last item on the agenda is item number 11, a CAO report relative to special gas tax street improvement fund adjustments.
Which one is that?
Item number 11.
We allow the CL's office. The report before you includes recommendations to realign revenue with the existing appropriations in the fund. Before I get into the report, I want to note for the record minor corrections on the technical side that's been provided to the clerk. If you want, I have copies for you as well. On recommendation number 2, the fund number should be 206 and not 205. On recommendation number 3, the department number 100/86 instead of 78. And in attachment A, the following counts should be deleted. They have no amounts next to them. E952 for North Broadway streetscape improvements. C898 for traffic safety upgrade with street lighting. A916 for Tirico Slope stabilization. And V708 for Cesar Chavez.
Okay.
Those have no amounts. They shouldn't have been on the list.
The clerk has all that, those updates?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
I emailed it to her this morning.
So in effect, this report is saying we're going to stop.
We're going to stop all projects pretty much that are not in construction and does not require a city match, because we don't want to jeopardize projects that have other funding sources that require a city match. We kept those with funding in place.
Have individual council office been made aware of this list?
Yes, the list was emailed to all the council offices last Tuesday. And I just want to look, I know you're concerned about your projects, so there's a couple of things I want to note. First of all, gas tax transfers for February has been suspended by the state. We're under the assumption that they will resume in May. This report takes that into consideration that we will get our money in May, so we're keeping our fingers crossed on that one. The other thing I want the committee to know is that I know you're concerned about your projects. We're going to maintain a list of the projects that we're deferring. If we get a windfall, we will come back to this committee. We will ask the project managers to give us an update on each and every project. So in the meantime, they can be working on cost estimating, MOUs, whatever else they need to do to get those projects ready for construction. These are mainly construction dollars.
Let me ask you one thing. In your report, you commented that we had taken some action in FSR 2.
Yes.
What did we do, and is that in conflict at all with what?
No, the actions in FSR 2 is we deferred 11 projects for about $5.4 million. Those were also projects not ready to go into construction or have right-of-way that's ready to go forward.
11 is in addition to what you're recommending in this report?
Mhm.
How many of these could be ready if we wanted to put them into the federal stimulus phase 2?
My understanding is a lot of these are not in the original list that was submitted, so I think the question is also, how much work are you going to need to do to have them be ready? And we cannot supplant money, so if there's money from before, they're going to say you can't supplant, and also any of the environmental requirements that we might have to go through. But I've asked the engineers, that preliminary feedback I'm getting is that none of these projects were really on the list, but we will be seeing the list shortly, so we can go through that again when we get the list.
Let me ask you, was the reason that they weren't a part of the stimulus was the view that they would be funded with the gas tax money?
I don't think so, because when that list was put together with the mayor's office heading it, that master list that came out, there was a number of projects on there, and there was anything that could meet the requirements that were set forth at that time. Project Readiness being one of them.
If I could go into mine specifically, I'm sure you'll be able to answer, but I'd like to get it before it goes to council. The Medina Road retaining wall,
I have the engineer here, so he can answer that question for you.
then in the same breath, I'm going to ask for Sunset Boulevard, Manual Canyon, and also the Grand Canal rehabilitation. Those are the
Okay. The Grand Canal rehabilitation, as you can see, is an S account. It's really a very O account. When talking to your district staff, that money they were looking at was for the sluice gates, which is really not eligible. This is gas tax for streets and roads. So last year, when I was doing the reappropriation report, I asked them if there was another project you had that needed the money right away, and we would be, willing to consider that, but nothing came forward. So the problem you have in the Grand Canal is a lot more than $160,000 problem right now.
Yeah, but my problem is the Grand Canal and those gates are critical for...
But this is not the right funding source for it.
But there was a funding source for $160,000. We had $160,000.
Yes, you did, yes.
And we had an opportunity to spend it?
Yes, you did.
On what, do you know?
It was the Grand Canal dates.
And why didn't we use it?
It's an issue of eligibility on those gates.
I mean, you got me really... over the top.
When departments ask for their money, they're not always very clear on the scope for us to be able to give them feedback on eligibility. So as we get further along and they refine their scope, things will come to light and we'll say that's not an eligible use of gas tax funds.
Okay, so this is more just clarifying.
Right.
What about the Sunset Boulevard, Manual Canyon Road? That is item number Y602, and that was at $319,000.
Okay, the amount in Y602 is savings.
The $319,000 savings, yeah, on Manual Canyon White.
Project's done.
This project's completed.
The project is
Yeah.
completed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is savings.
It's the savings, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
that's
Yes.
savings.
Correct. Yes.
It's not completely closed yet, but we did not touch any of the encumbrance amount or anything that the engineer needed for the change orders.
That was important to me. And then back to where you first came up here was the Medina Road retaining wall.
Your question specifically in regards to that?
Yeah, it says 200,000 suspended, and then another 219,000. You see what I'm saying now?
The question is, why was it suspended?
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah, in terms of the liability issue,
Uh-huh.
that's the liability.
Yeah.
That's a liability spot.
The reason why Medina Road was chosen is because there was a motion back in June of 2007 appropriating part of that money to the Department of Streets General Services to construct that work. To date, that work has not started. So what we're choosing to do is just to unappropriate that money. They can work on their MOU and cost estimating, whatever else they need to do, and then we'll move forward later. But we don't want that commitment and something similar to what you see with Prop K, with the reserve fund loan on there, if we're not able to complete it with the balance of the money, because we don't have funds to back it.
Okay, appreciate that, thanks.
Let me ask, on the projects that are suspended,
Yes.
are they in queue if money comes in for this fiscal year or next fiscal year to please move back?
Our plan is anything that's suspended, if we find that we were too conservative in our projections, we will come back to the committee with a list of all the projects suspended and ask the engineers to give us an update and give you recommendations based on project readiness.
Okay, will these stay in queue ahead of new projects?
Yes.
Okay, can we make sure that wording is in the report, because I think that clarity is needed when it goes to council? Okay. We'll move that item.
That would conclude all the items on the agenda.
Thank you.